Picture this. A French staff officer rides out from behind fortress walls, across a ravine carpeted with the dead, and stops his horse directly in front of an enemy general. The enemy is on foot, covered in mud and blood, standing over the carcass of the horse that was just shot out from under him. He is holding a sword. He has every reason to use it. The French officer straightens in his saddle and announces in a clear voice, "The Captain General sends compliments to the General, who has just covered himself with such glory." He salutes, then he turns around and rides back to his own lines. The battle resumes. The enemy general's name was François Capois. He had been born a slave. The army he was trying to destroy belonged to Napoleon Bonaparte, and within 24 hours that army would surrender to him. This is the Battle of Vertières, the story of how enslaved people broke the most powerful military on earth and forced Napoleon to sell half a continent. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand why Napoleon sent 40,000 soldiers to die on a Caribbean island, you need to understand what that island was worth. In 1800, Napoleon personally pressured the Spanish crown into secretly ceding the Louisiana territory back to France. He had a vision. Saint-Domingue, the wealthiest colony on the planet, would be the cash register. Louisiana would be the breadbasket. Together, they'd form a new French empire in the Western Hemisphere. He told his Navy Minister, Denis Decrès, "My intention is that we take possession of Louisiana with the shortest possible delay." But Saint-Domingue had a problem. Its 500,000 enslaved people had revolted 9 years earlier, and a formerly enslaved coachman named Toussaint Louverture had turned that revolt into a functioning government. Toussaint had beaten the Spanish. He'd beaten the British. He'd written his own constitution and opened trade with Britain and the United States. He even wrote Napoleon a letter addressed with breathtaking audacity, "From the first of the blacks to the first of the whites." Napoleon couldn't build an empire on land controlled by a man who considered himself an equal. So in December 1801, Napoleon assembled the largest overseas expedition of his career. 86 warships carrying over 30,000 soldiers, the cream of the French Revolutionary Army, veterans who had crushed coalitions across Europe. He gave command to his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc, a 30-year-old with a spotless military record, a jaw like a Roman bust, and the kind of confidence that comes from marrying into the most powerful family on earth. Leclerc's wife, Napoleon's sister Pauline, insisted on sailing with him, bringing her personal wardrobe, household silver, and a casual disregard for the fact that they were heading into a war zone. Napoleon's secret orders to Leclerc read like a screenplay for betrayal. Phase 1. Smile. Promise Toussaint that slavery will never return. Phase 2. Once the island is pacified, arrest every black officer. Phase 3. Restore slavery. The instructions were explicit. Leclerc was to treat Toussaint with respect until French control was established, and then wage what Napoleon called a war to the death. The first phase worked. Leclerc landed in February 1802 with overwhelming force and began picking off Toussaint's generals through a brutal combination of military pressure and bribery. He even turned Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Toussaint's most dangerous lieutenant, a man whose face and back carried the permanent scars of plantation whips, who had earned the nickname the Tiger for his savagery in battle. Dessalines temporarily switched sides and fought for France. Then Leclerc sprung the trap on Toussaint himself. He invited the old general to a meeting under a flag of truce. Toussaint came. French soldiers seized him, threw him onto a frigate, and shipped him across the Atlantic to a stone cell in the Jura Mountains. Fort de Joux sat at nearly 1,000 meters elevation. Toussaint had spent 60 years in Caribbean heat. The cell measured roughly 21 by 13 feet. Napoleon's government stripped him of his uniform, confiscated his watch, replaced it with a cheap clock, and forbade anyone to address him by his military rank. When Toussaint begged for firewood, his jailer wrote to Paris that black people had different constitutions and medical care would be wasted on him. This wasn't imprisonment, it was erasure. But before the cold killed him, Toussaint smuggled out a memoir containing a warning that would prove prophetic. He told his captors that in overthrowing him, they had done nothing more than cut down the trunk of the tree of black liberty in Saint-Domingue. The tree, he said, would sprout again from roots too deep and too numerous to destroy. On April 7, 1803, a guard found Toussaint's body slumped against the empty fireplace, his head resting on the cold stone as if he had simply fallen asleep. No doctor had visited him while he was alive. They only sent a surgeon after he was dead. Remember those roots? They're about to tear through the floor of the French Empire. Here's where we need to correct a common misconception about what happened next. In most Western accounts, the French lost Haiti because of yellow fever. Mosquitoes beat Napoleon. It's a clean story with no uncomfortable heroes. It is also at best half the truth. Yellow fever was devastating. By the spring of 1802, Leclerc had already lost a third of his original force to the disease. He wrote in his diary, "The rainy season has arrived. My troops are exhausted with fatigue and sickness." By the time he died of it himself in November 1802, an estimated 24,000 French soldiers were already in the ground. The disease would eventually claim somewhere between 40,000 and 50,000 men over the course of the expedition. But yellow fever didn't develop guerrilla tactics that turned every mountain into a fortress. Yellow fever didn't build an army from plantation workers who'd never held a musket. Yellow fever didn't win the battles of Ravine-à-Couleuvre and Crête-à-Pierrot. Human beings did that, specifically human beings who had been told their entire lives that they were incapable of doing it. When Leclerc died, command passed to General Donatien de Rochambeau, a man whose father had helped America win its independence. The son specialized in a different kind of freedom from basic human decency. Rochambeau abandoned any pretense of winning hearts and minds and launched what modern scholars have called a genocide. He imported hundreds of attack dogs from Cuba, animals specifically trained to hunt black people, and staged public spectacles where prisoners were ripped apart alive. He drowned captives in the Bay of Le Cap by the hundreds. Fishermen refused to eat anything caught in those waters for months afterward because no one wanted to eat the fish that had eaten human flesh. He burned people alive, hanged them from trees in public squares, and suffocated prisoners with sulfur in the holds of ships, creating what historians have called the first gas chambers in the Western Hemisphere. This wasn't counterinsurgency, it was industrialized cruelty. But here's what Rochambeau didn't understand. His atrocities were the single greatest recruiting tool the revolution ever had. Every faction in Saint-Domingue, black generals, mixed-race officers, former French loyalists, groups that had been fighting each other for a decade, looked at the dogs and the drownings and the burning and made the same calculation. There was no negotiating with this. There was no surrender option that ended in survival. They all rallied behind Dessalines. The tiger had switched sides for the last time. And then, in May 1803, the British declared war on France. The Royal Navy threw a blockade around the island like a noose. No more reinforcements from Europe, no more food, no more ammunition, no more escape. 20 to 30 French soldiers were dying of yellow fever every single day, men retching black blood, their skin turning the color of old parchment. Rochambeau, the man who had fed prisoners to dogs, began hosting elaborate balls and banquets inside Cap Français while his army rotted around him. He threw parties. He hoarded a personal fortune. He lost interest in commanding. This wasn't a general preparing for battle. It was a man waiting for the end. By October 1803, the French controlled only Cap Français and the small outpost at Mole Saint-Nicolas. Everything else belonged to Dessalines, who was massing 20,000 fighters in the hills to the south, sharpening their machetes and preparing for the final act. The night of November 17, 1803. The air is thick with humidity and the smell of coming rain. On the hills south of Cap Français, 15,000 Haitian soldiers move into position in the darkness. They don't have matching uniforms, many don't have shoes, some carry captured French muskets, flintlocks that misfire in the humidity and take 20 seconds to reload. Others carry the machete, a 2-foot blade of forged steel, originally designed for cutting sugarcane, now used for cutting something else entirely. The machete deserves a moment. In close combat, it had a critical advantage over the French bayonet. The bayonet was designed for thrusting, a narrow point that required a straight lunge to be effective. If a soldier was pressed in a crowd, he couldn't pull his arm back far enough to thrust. The machete was a chopping weapon. It needed only a short arc, could be used in a tight scrum, and when it connected with the thin cotton of a French infantry uniform, it didn't glance off. It went through. The French knew this. They feared close combat with the Haitians the way a boxer fears a wrestler. Dessalines has positioned his forces in 4 columns, converging on Fort Vertières. The fort sits on a hill at the end of a long ravine, a natural corridor of death. The only approach runs uphill directly into the mouths of French 12-pound cannon. The French have roughly 5,000 troops dug in behind earthworks and wooden palisades, well supplied with case shot and canister, the artillery equivalent of a giant shotgun. This wasn't a battle in the traditional sense. It was a siege assault against a fortified hilltop, the single most lethal operation in warfare. As the first grey light touches the ridgeline, French sentries spot movement in the ravine. Trumpets sound the alarm. A Haitian soldier named Clairvaux fires the first shot of the day. The ravine erupts. Now zoom in. François Capois sits mounted on a tall horse at the front of the 9th Demi-Brigade. He is 37 years old. Born on a sugar plantation in Port-de-Paix, he spent his first 27 years as a slave. When Dessalines raided his plantation in 1793, the young man's extraordinary skill with a machete and his complete disregard for personal safety caught immediate attention. He rose through the rebel ranks with terrifying speed, from foot soldier to lieutenant to captain to brigadier general. He carried himself like a man who had already died once and found it unimpressive. His troops call him Capois-la-Mort, Capois the Death. Even the French use the nickname. He turns in his saddle and shouts the words that will become Haiti's battle cry. Grenadier à l'assaut, nan point man, nan point papa, saki muri, zafe ayo. March forward, forget your mother, forget your father. Whoever dies, that's their business. This isn't bravado. Many of these soldiers practice voodoo and believe that death in battle means their spirits will return across the water to Africa. They are not marching toward destruction. They are marching toward home. Capois kicks his horse forward. Behind him, the 9th Demi-Brigade begins climbing. The French response is immediate. A 12-pound cannon loaded with case shot, a thin metal canister packed with musket balls that bursts open at the muzzle, turning the cannon into a massive shotgun, fires directly into the column. At close range, a single round of case shot can cut down 30 men in a line. The sound is a wet, tearing shriek. Haitian soldiers fall in clusters. The men behind step over the bodies, close ranks, and keep climbing. They are singing. The first assault slams into the outer works and is thrown back. Capois regroups, charges again. French gunners reload, pour more case shot down the ravine. The second attack fails. A third charge. Capois drives his men to within 100 yards of the walls, close enough to hear the French officers screaming orders, close enough to see the faces of the men aiming muskets at them. At this range, the Charleville musket, standard French infantry weapon, is punching 69 caliber lead balls through the Haitians' thin cotton shirts and the occasional leather cartridge belt. There is no armor to speak of, no shields, just bodies against lead. The third attack breaks. 2/3 of the 9th Demi-Brigade are down. Any rational commander stops here. Capois launches a fourth assault. This time he rides at the very front, sword raised over his head, screaming en avant. A cannonball tears the hat from his skull. He doesn't break stride. Then grape shot finds his horse. The animal shudders, legs buckle, and crashes down, pinning Capois in the mud. From the ramparts, Rochambeau watches through a spyglass. The general is down. The attack is over. Capois heaves the dying horse off his body, stands up caked in mud and his horse's blood, draws his sword and starts running uphill on foot. En avant, en avant. The French drums roll, not a charge, a ceasefire. What follows is perhaps the most absurd moment in the history of modern warfare. Here is a French army that has spent the past year importing dogs from Cuba to eat people alive, drowning prisoners by the boatload, suffocating captives with sulfur fumes, and now watching a man they have shot at for hours refuse to fall down. They decide this is the appropriate moment for etiquette. A French staff officer, young, impeccably uniformed despite the chaos, mounts his horse and rides out through his own gate, past his own cannon, down the slope, through the smoke and the bodies, and stops directly in front of Capois, an armed enemy general, a man he's been trying to kill all morning. He delivers his message like he's presenting an award at a garden party. The Captain General sends compliments to the general who has just covered himself with such glory. He says it loudly enough for both armies to hear. Then he salutes, turns and rides back up the hill as calmly as if he were returning from a Sunday trot. For a frozen moment, 20,000 men on both sides of the ravine are completely silent. No cannon, no muskets, no screaming. Just the sound of Capois breathing, standing alone among the dead, holding a sword in one hand and absolutely nothing in the other. Then someone on the Haitian side starts cheering, and the ravine explodes. The cost of that chivalric interruption is something Rochambeau will never calculate on paper, but will pay for with his empire. Because every Haitian soldier just watched their general get knocked down and get back up, and then watched the enemy confirm what they already believed. Capois cannot be killed. The French didn't demoralize the Haitians. They canonized their commander in the middle of the fight. Dessalines commits his reserves. General Gabart, the youngest commander in the army, barely into his 20s but already a veteran of 3 years of guerrilla warfare, leads fresh troops into the ravine. This isn't a careful flanking maneuver. It's a flood. The French respond. They have to. Jean-Philippe Dau, an officer commanding Rochambeau's personal guard of grenadiers, forms his men shoulder to shoulder and leads a downhill countercharge. These are professional European soldiers in tall bearskin hats and cross-belted white uniforms, bayonets fixed, marching into the teeth of the Haitian wave. They crash into Gabart's column at the base of the ravine. This is where the fighting gets intimate. Bayonet against machete. The French thrust low, aiming for the abdomen below the cartridge belt. The Haitians chop downward, targeting the exposed neck above the high collar and the forearms that extend past the cuff. In the press of bodies, the bayonet becomes almost useless because there's no room for the lunge. The machete keeps working, short arcs, tight spaces. The geometry of close combat favors the shorter weapon. Clairvaux, who fired the first shot that morning, is deep in the scrum, fighting with a captured French musket he's using as a club. One of his epaulets has been shot clean off his shoulder. He doesn't notice. Gabart's troops haul 2 captured French cannon around and aim them directly at the fort's wooden palisade. The guns fire at point-blank range. Timbers explode inward. The fort's wall is breached. Then the sky splits open. A tropical deluge crashes over the battlefield. Thunder, lightning. Visibility drops to nothing. The ravine becomes a river of mud and diluted blood, and in the chaos and the dark and the rain, Rochambeau makes his decision. He pulls his surviving troops back from Fort Vertières and retreats into Cap Français. He knows what everyone on that hill already knows. Saint-Domingue is lost. The French Empire in the Western Hemisphere is over. Under cover of the storm, the Haitians take the hill. The flag goes up. The morning of November 19, 1803, dawns quiet over the ravine. The rain has washed the worst of the blood into the soil, but the ground is still thick with the debris of battle. Broken muskets, shattered cartridge boxes, scraps of white French uniforms tangled with the plain cotton shirts of the Haitian dead. The cost is staggering. At least 200 Haitians are dead and 2,000 wounded. French casualties are estimated at 2/3 of their garrison. Dessalines receives the French envoy Duveyrier at his headquarters. Behind Duveyrier comes a soldier leading a white horse, a gift from Rochambeau to Capois. The gift is exquisite in its hypocrisy. The same general who fed black prisoners to dogs is now sending a symbol of aristocratic respect to the man who just destroyed him. Negotiations last all day. By nightfall, the terms are settled. Rochambeau has 10 days to load his surviving troops onto ships and leave the island forever. And this is where the story delivers one of history's most staggering ironies. Rochambeau loads his army onto ships and sails directly into the British blockade. The Royal Navy captures his entire fleet. The man who drowned prisoners, who burned people alive, who unleashed attack dogs on defenseless captives, spends the remainder of the Napoleonic Wars as a prisoner in England, rotting in the same kind of confinement he once inflicted on others. Across the Atlantic, Napoleon receives the news and makes a calculation that will reshape the map of the world. Without Saint-Domingue, there is no staging ground. Without the staging ground, there is no point to Louisiana. The entire Western blueprint is dead. He summons his finance minister and says, "I renounce Louisiana. It is not only New Orleans that I cede, it is the whole colony without reservation. I renounce it with the greatest regret. To attempt obstinately to retain it would be folly." He sells 828,000 square miles of North American territory to the United States for $15 million, less than 3 cents an acre. The land that will become 13 future American states, bought not through American diplomacy, but through Haitian blood. When advisors warned Napoleon he was creating a future superpower, he waved them off. In 2 or 3 centuries, the Americans may be found too powerful for Europe, but my foresight does not embrace such remote fears. He was wrong. It took less than one. On January 1st, 1804, Dessalines stood in the city of Gonaive and did something no enslaved population in modern history had ever done. He proclaimed the birth of an independent nation. He gave the country back its indigenous name, Haiti. He ripped the white panel from the French tricolor flag, and a seamstress named Catherine Flon stitched the blue and red together, a flag representing the unity of black and mixed-race Haitians against their former masters. The Declaration of Independence was written by Dessalines' secretary, a young man named Louis Boiron-Tonnerre. There is a scene here that captures the entire revolution in a single moment. When the officers gathered to draft the declaration, the first attempts were too mild, too diplomatic. Dessalines rejected them. He needed something that sounded like the war they had just survived. He turned to Boiron-Tonnerre, who stood up and said, "To write this Declaration of Independence, we need the skin of a white man for parchment, his skull for an inkwell, his blood for ink, and a bayonet for a pen." The room didn't gasp, they cheered. That sentence tells you everything about what this revolution cost the people who won it. 12 years of warfare had burned the diplomacy out of them. They hadn't negotiated their way to freedom. They had cut their way through. And the declaration Boiron-Tonnerre produced wasn't a philosophical treatise like Jefferson's, it was a scar. But Toussaint's warning about roots proved true in ways he never intended. The tree of liberty that sprouted from his sacrifice grew thorns. Dessalines crowned himself Emperor Jacques Dessalines. He ordered the massacre of the remaining French civilians on the island, thousands killed in the early months of 1804. He enforced plantation labor so harsh that his own people said it felt like slavery with a different flag. The man who liberated a nation began to govern it with the same whip that had scarred his own back. On the morning of October 17, 1806, Emperor Dessalines rode toward Port-au-Prince to crush a rebellion led by his own officers. At a bridge called Pont Rouge, he rode into an ambush. Shots rang out. His horse collapsed. His leg was pinned. Surrounded by men he had once commanded, men whose freedom he had won, Dessalines screamed for the one officer still loyal to him. "À mon secours, Charlotin!" Colonel Charlotin Marcadieu, a mixed-race cavalry officer, ran to his emperor and threw his own body over Dessalines like a human shield. They shot Marcadieu first, then they shot Dessalines. Then they split his skull with a saber. Then they stabbed him 3 times with a dagger. They stripped his body naked and dragged it through the streets of Port-au-Prince. Soldiers stood guard over the corpse and dared any civilian to bury him. The founder of the nation lay in the road like refuse. Only one person came forward. A woman named Défilé, described in historical accounts as mentally disturbed, walked through the ring of armed soldiers. She knelt in the dust beside the man who had defeated Napoleon. She gathered the broken pieces of his body, and she carried them alone to the cemetery at the Church of Sainte-Anne and buried him. No generals attended, no officials. No one who owed their freedom to the corpse in Défilé's arms had the courage to claim it. A madwoman gave dignity to the man who gave a nation its name. The Haitian Revolution is the most important event you were never taught. It defeated 3 European empires. It ended slavery on the richest colony in the Western Hemisphere 60 years before the American Civil War. It doubled the size of the United States without Americans firing a single shot. It proved for the first time in modern history that enslaved people could not merely rebel but win, not merely survive but build a sovereign nation. And it was erased. French historians buried Vertières for 2 centuries. American textbooks credit the Louisiana Purchase to Jefferson's diplomacy without mentioning the 50,000 French graves that made it possible. The revolution terrified every slaveholding power on earth precisely because it worked, and so they agreed collectively to forget it. We remember Thermopylae because 300 free men chose a beautiful death. We forget Vertières because enslaved people chose an ugly victory. We prefer our revolutions clean, our heroes uncomplicated, our liberators grateful and quiet. Haiti offers none of that. It offers something far more dangerous. Proof that the people at the very bottom of the world can shatter the people at the very top, and that the price of freedom is never, ever paid in a single installment. If you made it this far, you're a true history enthusiast. Please verify your subscription now. It really helps the channel keep these forgotten stories alive. Check out this next video on the screen about the rise of Napoleon's empire, where we explore the other wars he fought while Haiti was burning through his army. I'll see you there.